Hello and welcome to this British Film Designers Guild Design Forum on Silo, winner of the Production Design Award for TV Band 3 and 4 programmes. I'm Jonathan Green and I'll be your host for tonight. The Guild was formed over 75 years ago with the aim of raising the standards and profiles of the art department and protecting the interests of its members, and those core principles still apply today. We're a fantastic community of over 700 accredited skilled technicians and designers whose talents span the various branches of the art department in film and television. And that talent is very much in evidence tonight, as I'd like to introduce production designer Gavin Bocquet, set decorator Amanda Bernstein, and supervising art director Phil Harvey. So,
Hi.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining. Before we get stuck into details of Silo, would you mind explaining a little bit about how you started out in the industry? And I'll start with you, Gavin, if I may.
Yeah, going back a little bit now. But in theory, I was at the Royal College of Art and postgrad doing 3D design. And there, in those sort of early 80s, late 70s, there weren't really any film courses as such, media courses like there are now. So I wasn't exactly sure, although film was always attractive. But Stuart Craig, who obviously is a very well-renowned production designer here, he was at the Royal College 10 years before me, and he was just starting his first production design role with Saturn 3, infamous Saturn 3, with Harvey Keitel and Farrah Fawcett Majors. And he felt he needed somebody in a science fiction world to design props and hand props, control consoles, weapons, etc. And he thought somebody from the 3D design world at the Royal College might be good. So he put literally a handwritten note on our notice board in the month I was leaving saying, anybody wanting to design props for a science fiction film. And that was sort of the opening. And in those days, there weren't really concept artists, nothing like there is now. There were illustrators who were doing production illustrators, but everything was sort of done in-house, really. And Stuart was sort of breaking the mold a little bit by employing people from outside the normal film world. And the unions were very strong in terms of getting in at that point. And you had to be in the union to get a job, or you had to get a job to be in the union. So they gave me the title of Space Equipment Deviser, which the union didn't have any. So I was allowed to carry on working that. And going forward, I've worked with Stuart 5 times over the following years. He became one of my main mentors and helped me get where I am today. So sliding doors moments as always.
Amazing. What a brilliant story. Thank you. Amanda, how about you?
I started out at art school doing a degree in furniture design and ended up working as a receptionist in a commercials production company where I was the worst receptionist they'd ever had because I can't spell and therefore I can't type. So, but I met some art directors and I started working on commercials and pop promos. And then a friend knew a wonderful producer called Jake Ebert, who had just done a film called The Mission with Stuart Craig. And he spoke to Stuart Craig and they needed a junior in the art department. So I started off my film career as a junior on a film called Cry Freedom, where I met Gavin Bocquet, who was an assistant art director then.
Another bit of synchronicity in sliding doors.
Yeah. That's often the case in this industry. That's fabulous. And Phil, how about you?
Well, again, it's more to do with sliding doors, because I did 3-dimensional design at Birmingham University, studying interior design. Came out of it despondent and went into theatre. So I worked at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre as a prop man and a construction person until I worked with some brilliant people like Alan Rickman, Ken Branagh, Francis Barber, and it was just a season of these new incomers to the industry. It was Alan who put me through to, he knew Percy Harris, who ran Riverside Theatre School. And at the time, it was joining Kingston University to do a postgrad course. So he got me through to the interviews, and I went and did the interview, it was accepted, did the BA honours, no, sorry, it's post-grad at that time, in film and TV and theatre. And then continued my career from there. And again, I met Gavin on Empire of the Sun, and we've sort of been together ever since.
Brilliant. Oh, that's fabulous. That's really nice to hear. That's great. Well, thank you all. Gavin,
at least Phil's contact wasn't Stuart Craig. It was somebody else.
yes.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, no, that's good. All these networks. That's fabulous.
And
Gavin, how
although
did
it
you?
might look like it, we had, just to say, although it might look like, we have worked together on and off throughout those years, but we're not always working together.
That's true.
Obviously carried on for 30 years, so obviously something works.
Yes, no, that's great. I always find it's really lovely when you can reconnect with people that you've worked with in the past. It's great to reform a team. How did you come to work on the show originally, Gavin?
Silo, as normal. As normal, your agent as production designer. I mean, often you'll get job possibilities through people you've worked with before, you know, whether it's producers or directors, but you're also open to anything new coming in. And I just got a call, you know, before a Christmas period from the agent saying this job was a possibility. Didn't really know much about it, obviously, at the time, but as soon as Morton Tilden was involved, you think, oh, that could be quite attractive. So, you know, having seen Morton's work before, and then basically met him, had a sort of, you know, an interview as you do some work before the interview, have a chat with Graham Yost, the showrunner, writer, and, you know, within 2 weeks, they decide to give you the job or not, basically.
Fabulous. And so just for viewers watching and may not have seen the show, can you just explain briefly what is the silo?
Well, the silo is a mile deep, well, underground silo, as the silo name suggests, where 10,000 people live. And you're not sure at the beginning what year, what time, why they're there. And I think even after series 1, you're still left hanging into exactly what the reasons for it being there. But we met obviously quite early on the writer of the novels, and there was sort of an understanding that even though the novels were quite visually explicit, Hugh didn't really have any great demands about what we were doing. He said everybody who reads his novels will probably think about this world in a different way, and he was quite happy that people would do that. So between Graham, myself, and Morton, we had a pretty free rein at the beginning within the bounds of the script to design that world. And, you know, obviously shows these days are called world building shows if they fit into a certain bracket, and obviously this one did. You mean, everything that we saw was going to be basically, apart from 1 half-day shoot in a cucumber farm, was going to be in a studio on a set. Basically, it was a complete build, no locations at all.
Fantastic. And just your process of working when you're starting on a job and you're creating a brand new world from scratch, what's your process? How do you start with that? What's the starting point?
Well, obviously the script is the main point. That, you know, the most worrying day is the first day with a blank piece of paper. I mean, that's, you have nothing at that point, but you soon get into conversations with Morton and Graham, and they obviously have ideas of where things are going, where they might want things to be. And our job as a production designer is to help sort of visualize that. You've got to try and be part of the team for that. There's no point in going off in your own direction, doing your own thing, what you want it to be. It's very much a collaborative thing. So all three of you are bouncing off each other. And I think often happens, I think Phil will confirm this, there's often at the beginning a sort of 5 or 6 week, almost pure concept period, where it'll basically be myself with Morton and Graham, but then 2 or 3 concept artists coming on board. Phil will probably start doing some practical work in terms of budgeting and planning, and in this case, where do we shoot, because there was no studio. And then after that 6 weeks, you hopefully have some foundation of what those visuals will be. And interesting, you'll see a bit later that, as I said, that you have an interview often, you know, to get a job. And often I, and I'm sure other production designers, will get a few images together in the 3 or 4 days before the interview, whether it's reference images, just to see if you can suggest ideas or show your interest in the project, and even produce some visuals of some sort, just to show that you're in that world. And when I look back at some of the early designs I put together in 3D in the 3D model world, they ended up being quite close to what we ended up doing. So it's interesting how sometimes you look back and your first instincts end up being where you end up going, even though you have another 6 weeks period of throwing different ideas around. I mean, that's not always the case, but sometimes we've been on shows, Phil will confirm, where you almost have too much time. You know, the film is a very instinctive business, and sometimes they want answers yesterday, not in 6 weeks' time.
Mm.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I guess from a practical point of view, maybe it's a question for Phil. I'm interested to know how much of the set is real and how much is virtual.
Well, a lot of this was real. So as Gavin said, you know, the initial stages of this were trying to find. We did have a Hoddesdon a site that we sort of looked at for turning into stages, but it did dictate on the spaces that we had to build these things. There was certainly visual effects involved in this, but we tried to do as much as we could with building sets.
Yeah, I think that magic line between what's physical and what is visual effects it just depends on scripts and scenes and what scenes are and how long they are and page count. I mean, our costs are based on, you know, basically paint and nails and wood and timber and plaster. Visual effects costs are based on shot count, basically. So that you're trying to get that understanding, because they have no idea what the shot count is. But if it went back 15, 20 years when visual effects people were starting on a show, they would often start quite a long time after us. And we always felt that was, you know, we need them right at the beginning. And Daniel visual effects on this, as is more the case now, almost started straight away, Phil, I think. Maybe not immediately, but certainly well to the concept period.
Yeah.
And it was a really good relationship between the two of us, just understanding in every set, every scene, every part of the silo, what do we need to build? Most visual effects companies will tell you build as much as you can, because their world is great. It can do whatever you want, but it's not the cheapest. You know, it's not a magic wand of spending no money. If it's a very short scene with a very wide, big background, then the chances are you're going to use more visual effects. If it's a long dialogue scene in somewhere smaller or medium, they would prefer you to have a real background. So every time you come to something, that decision is based on the scene, the length of the scene, what's going on in that scene. And in this, I think, you know, Morton, as the showrunner director, was always keen to not just have very close-up shots of dialogue against a wall and then wide shots of the whole silo. He wanted to get that middle ground where there was a huge amount of set that could be still being extended, but you weren't restricted to just shooting the close dialogue scenes up against a small piece of wall. I mean, it was interesting for me when I finally saw the show, which is a great sort of credit to Daniel. Even I couldn't quite remember where we stopped and where they started, because it was quite a very accurate mix between us and them, and that comes from us giving them the information, the details, the textures, and everything, and also from a lighting point of view. So there's never you could never write a pure theory down on how those decisions are made. But it really is, where is that line? Where do you draw that line to make it visually best and financially the best for the production?
Yeah, and I guess every job is different, but the scale of the sets were really, really impressive to me. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But I'd like to ask Amanda about the set deck side of things. You know, again, when you're basically creating a whole world, where do you get your inspiration from, and how do you go about your job?
Well, a lot of it was from the script, and working with Gavin and Morton and Graham Yost, the showrunner. because they didn't want any, it wasn't a decorated world. It all went back to square one. So they didn't want any, and there was no wood in the silo. So there were some quite strong parameters. And Morton was very clear on what he liked and what he didn't like. So I'd show him a range of stuff and he would usually point out what he absolutely hated. So at least you have a direction of going in. And it was all sort of supposed to be based on sort of East German, no frills design. So I got the chance to design an awful lot of the furniture that's within the silo, going back to what I used to do at college.
Right.
And then I did things like I researched the beginning of electricity, because there's a lot in the script about the generator and light bulbs. And so I did this, I found out about the beginning of electricity. A lot of the lights had holophane glass. So you got more watts per, I don't know, amp, whatever it is. You got more light per electricity, whatever. So a lot of the lights are based on, you know, holophane, reflecting glass and that sort of thing. Just the whole recycling thing of the silo is very hierarchical. The top of the silo, everything is much newer than the bottom of the silo, which is mechanical. So all the glass would be recycled glass, but at the top it would be much clearer, and at the bottom it would be a much dirtier color glass, the browns, the orange, you know, the sort of ambers. And that went with all the fabrics, the furniture, everything. At the top of the silo would be newer and cleaner colors, and at the bottom of the silo would be much sort of dirtier, muddier colors, and you know, mended or, you know, pretty beaten up.
I mean, interestingly, the prop department with Amanda and Johnny, they were recycling the furniture as well for different, so they were almost living the silo life as well as the silo was cycling its wares. Because I mean, for a year's shoot, Amanda couldn't have rented anything; it would have been too expensive. So everything was purchased or made and then adapted and changed. And once it got a bit too used, it ended up being dressed in the lower part of the silo.
Yeah, and recovered, repainted. You know, we did an awful lot of buying old metal bits from markets. We got known as the people that bought all the really rubbishy old metal bits that no one else would possibly want.
Well, they used to bring stuff out. They knew you were coming. So all
I think they did. They'd say, "Oh, we found this in some old barn." You know.
Excellent. And from a practical point of view, Phil, how long was the set build? And I believe, were you building during COVID? Is that correct?
That's correct. We had a number of sort of stalling periods of time where we had COVID. We had a director who had to go into hospital for a certain amount of time, which delayed the shooting. There was a number of things like that went on. But in general, we were sort of building these sets. The biggest one was the silo shaft, the central core of it. And we were sort of building that a duration of like 16 to 18 weeks. And then there was discussions with directors about, oh, do we extend it? Do we add an extra portion on? And so all of that went on. And then we were trying to, Gavin worked out very well a design for linking alleyways that led into that, which was on a separate stage. And but it was you know, I was looking recently back at the budget, and we had about 170 lines. Now, some of those were sets within sets, but we had to deal with all that during this time of filming and prep.
Yeah, I think with the number of sets we had to do, we knew there wasn't space or the time or the money to build them all separately. So we had to have a system of reworking set pieces in a modular way, which is how the silo would have been built. So we were working in their world. And the advantage of that was obviously you can be very efficient with your materials and your costs and the space, but then you've also got to be very careful that you don't make every set look the same. I mean, you've still got to try and get that difference in. And I think it was I think if I'm right, Phil, however much we reconfigured apartments and redressed them, we never had the same apartment. We never had the same physical shape.
We
always
didn't.
managed to make them a little bit different.
Exactly. And with the help of Amanda with wallpapers and dressing and the paint finishes, we were able to achieve different looks for, using the same spaces.
Yeah, you never know whether that works until the theory is great, but you never know whether that works until you see the show put together and really understand where you are, because it's quite a challenge for Morton and the other directors and Graham to, keep people. They didn't want to feel like a claustrophobic show. They wanted it to be open at certain points. Graham always equated it to being like living on an aircraft carrier, that 80% of the time you're down in the boiler room, you're down in the small offices, but occasionally you go up on deck and you can get fresh air, you can be there in a way. And in a way, our central shaft and the staircase was that element to the people who lived in the silo. Everything else was rather closed in and tight. Although they've made efforts to say, that people were generally happy. It wasn't, that's what they knew for 300 years. The silo was built 50 years from now, and we were in it at about 300 years forward. So we knew our timescales for aging. And just jumping forward a little bit, obviously the reference initially was sort of East European socialist architecture, and we looked at different materials. And obviously concrete was very big in that sort of architecture. And the great thing about that is that it gave us great opportunities for weathering and aging because of how concrete works over centuries. So further down in the depths of the silo, it was much more run down, damp, patches, the ironwork showing through, and up in the top, it was a lot neater and a lot tidier. So that helped us have a material that we could really play around with in certain parts of the silo.
That's brilliant. I really love the slide that runs down the stairs. Was that something that was scripted, or was that one of your ideas?
No, that came up, and Phil was the first one to test it, I think.
Brilliant.
Probably was. Did I have an accident? Did I fall off it? I don't know.
That's excellent. And another thing I
sort of
absolutely love.
I mean, one of the thought was that it was almost like a medieval society. There wasn't really paper. There was nothing really written down. Everything, there were computers, but very basic computers that passed information on. But everything was done by dialogue. Everything was done with speech. Whatever that was for the originators of the silo to keep control of the masses. That'll probably come out in season 2, 3, and 4. But in our world, that's how Graham felt it should feel like it in a medieval way, not in a period way medieval, but how people would have communicated in those times.
Fabulous. I wonder whether now is a good time to look at some of your lovely visuals, so that people can get a bit more of an insight into not only the design process, but just to be able to see concepts and then finished sets.
Yeah, there's an awful lot.
Lovely props.
I'll sort of whiz through them.
Yeah.
We get that. There we go. So you got that screen? Yeah.
Yep, that's all working.
So I'll just jump in. What's coming? These I often, in this sort of world, I'll often work in 3D. I basically use Vectorworks for 3D. I don't use it for drawings, but I've been using Vectorworks since it was Minicad in the mid 90s and before it became Vectorworks, but I always use it as a 3D. And although I've tried other 3D software, the one is always the better. And I look back recently, and the first thing I ever built in 3D was Gunga City on Phantom Menace. That was my first, and all it was a series of spheres floating in the water. But that's where I start. If it's something that I can do architecturally, like these images here, and these were early ideas that, say, I was putting together along with the concept artists as well. And this was just playing around with staircases, different ideas for size and spaces. We introduced, like you can see here, quite early on, some metalwork, metal trusses. But I think we all agreed that the more we added that, the more sci-fi it started to look like the inside of a spaceship. So I think Morton and Graham were really keen that it looked much more earthy and gritty than that. So we sort of avoided that. Here are various concepts from our guys. A lot of guys, Gert, Arno, Tim, a lot of guys, Max, and you have a bit of free reign. It's like, just go for it. Just come up with different ideas and different shapes. And you'll end up taking bits from one, bits from another. They'll take bits that I've done, and eventually you'll come up with some visual that works. The job that Phil and I have to do while all this is going on is try to work out the designs in terms of how they'll work in terms of being built and spaces. You don't want the concept artists to be really restricted by that. It's a bit like a writer. You don't want writers to be restricted by what we can do. It's our job to make it happen. So they tend to have a freer reign. I'll try and guide them because I'll know pretty quickly what might be possible, what might not be possible. I mean, these are some of the early reference ideas from that sort of world. Just looking for that sort of madness, that sort of architecture. And quite interestingly, even in socialist architecture, every architect, where it can, will try and add a bit of a flourish, even though they're told not to. Like the little bit on the left here, I'm sure they didn't really want to do something like that. So we knew we had opportunities to be a bit flamboyant with the architecture at some time. It didn't just have to be flat and boring. In fact, curves and shapes and circles are a big part of what we did. So that's the first little group.
Brilliant.
These were, I just did a couple of simple. Can you see that you're coming in? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's working. Yeah.
So these are just very simple early models that I put together and just animated within Vectorworks, which, so you can see we're playing around with almost a double helix of stairs. One idea was that we had one set of stairs that went up and one set of stairs that went down, but that didn't really work for the action because people needed to bump into each other on the stairs. But you tend to explore all those things, and I have a feeling I think let me have a look. I think one of these models was the model. I did this model before for the interview. I think it was sort of part of just throwing that idea. So although it doesn't look like what we ended up doing, there's something in there that, definitely some sort of connection to that.
Yeah.
So and this was all in the sort of the first 6 weeks of the show. And then we started with the concept. I was just John Dickinson in the States. So I would give him my models like these. So these are my models that I produced, but then we pass them over in 3D to the concept artists. These are Patrick's, I think Patrick Faulkwetter from LA. And then they would bring them to life. They would do things that I can't do. I can form what I think is a good design, and they've got more time to do that. So these are the sort of second line. This is when we've got a design that Morton and Graham like, and we're starting to bring it to life. And while that's happening all the time, Phil and I are always looking at, well, where is this going to fit? How is it going to fit? What stage? And at Hoddesdon that Phil mentioned, we sort of knew that we needed a stage that was if we were going to get maybe 2 levels of the silo, we sort of would need a 40-foot stage height. And that's hard in an industrial site. They don't normally go that high. But the freezer unit we found, or the production found in Hoddesdon, did have a 40'5". I think it was 45, wasn't it? I think
that's right. Yeah.
And it did have a big space, a lot of columns going right across it, which we were told would come down, but eventually didn't come down. So we're quite proud of the fact that they're built into the set. You don't see them, but they're built in. There's a whole line of columns across the silo. And in fact, there's a road column that shouldn't be there, but nobody's ever spotted it. Quite funny. On just a silly little thing, well, not silly, it's really important. So these are little tests we do. This was a test for the staircase, just to check how the going was, the going up and down, and we could move this in and out just to get an idea of what the size. So Phil and I are always really keen to do these. You know, you're spending a lot of money building a lot of sets, so you want to make sure that they actually operate properly. You don't want to be guessing it at the time. So we do quite a few things. I'm not sure the next one is. To see what pops up here. Oh, this is just little movements. We're getting a bit more specific about details of the balustrade and the handrail and the ergonomics of that. You know, we're not architects from a technical point of view, but you have to design something that looks believable and looks safe. And the introduction of the double handrail was quite important because it allowed we didn't want to block everybody off who was on the walkways and the stairs, but we didn't want such a high balustrade that you were hiding the people. So that was quite a good introduction. Let me see what else we've got here. Flick through them. So, here we go. There. So obviously you get into that purpose where we start to build models of the sets and how they work. And the black area in theory is what we ended up building, 270 degrees, I think, Phil, wasn't it? Of the
That's right. Yeah.
silo and 2 levels.
Yeah.
And the fourth side was all green screen. So if they did want to do something that looked like you were on a different level, a different floor, that was possible. Initially, we had, I think, this section was added by Morton. Morton was really keen to have another section, so he had a lot of nice discussions with the finance side of Apple about what they do. But they all knew that it was if the show worked, it was a big investment for season 2 and 3. The sets are all
and then where the green is, we actually built a section of that as well as a lower platform that they could continue all the way around.
Yeah. So you could do the whole thing, but we were keen to get 2 floors. So it was we were really dependent to the inch on what the distance was between the 2 floors, because we had to fit them into the stage. They wanted to be able to go down one staircase down to the next level, the main level. So we were you're really bounded by the size of the stage you're in. And I think Matthew, one of the producers, if they hadn't have found more this Hobridge, what is it, Hobridge? I can't remember now. Hoddesdon, sorry, the Hoddesdon site, they might not have made the show because it was sort of still around COVID, early COVID, and everything was busy. There was nothing available. And you can just get an idea here. This was the stage next door. So we actually knocked through.
Linking through.
So we had all you can see it's a bit of a mess at the moment, but this was the alleyway set. So you could go from
amazing
all the way into that. So that was a good introduction for people coming to see the set, because Morton always used to bring them in through here and then up the stairs and, okay, right.
Wow. Yeah, fabulous.
Quite a big space. And here's that's one of bit of the opening. I think this is from season 1. So we did lots of investigation into agriculture, what would be on different floors. We didn't see half of what we had concepted, to be honest, of what, if it wasn't in the script, we didn't need to show those floors, but it had to be a whole living environment. Obviously, this is me videoing a video, so the quality is not great. But that was the idea, that they always wanted to feel as though you were connecting one set to another. And even though the cafeteria wasn't physically connected to the shaft, with a bit of clever visual effects, and you can make that look like you're walking directly from one to the other. I think is that the last one, shaft? Let's just see what comes up. So there's another clip from the film, basically. So we're holding pretty close to what we'd originally designed.
Yeah, fantastic.
On that basis, and a lot of repeating architecture, and that sort of mix coming into real life and real work with really good credit to Daniel and the visual effects side of things on that. So that was the first. Should I jump onto the next one? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's fabulous stuff.
So I think this is the stage we were in. This is the metalwork that was starting to go in. And then this was tests of lots of concrete, different samples, what we could do: shuttered concrete, aged concrete, distressed concrete. Just getting ideas, more decorative concrete that would get up in the top. A great construction team with Steve Bowen and his guys. So that was early, and then these were playing around. The red lines here are columns that existed in the stage. So there we had to try and avoid them. You can see, look, they went right across the stage.
Gosh.
And they were meant to come down, but eventually through negotiation with the owners, they didn't take them down. So we managed to. I think, did we take 2 down, Phil? I can't remember. Did we take these 2?
Those blue ones.
No, we were going to, but we didn't, did we?
We were going to, but we didn't. So we had to cleverly sort of reposition the set so that the center core was over one of them, and it all worked out from there.
So the metalwork was great. I mean, we had lots of problems with metalwork because metal was really hard to get in those days, not a transport coming from China. And if there was any metalwork that was needed, it tended to go to big architectural jobs rather than the little film world. But Steve Bowen, our construction manager, managed to make that work, and it was almost a work of art in itself, the structure. And it was all obviously all computer controlled cutout pieces that just came together like Lego, didn't it, really? For
Amazing.
It did, yeah.
all the timber pieces. And I remember when Hugh Howey, the writer of the novels, came one day when it was in this state, and we walked up together up to this point, and he actually started crying. It was
Oh.
no, and you thought, well, hey, well, hold on, why is he crying? But it was just, you know, he'd spent 14. I think the project had been with the Ridley Scott Company for about 10 years, trying to get made. So it can take that long for people to get projects together. So suddenly he could see it actually happening. So you start to get a feel on, oh, just to show how the job never ends. This is me photographing a handrail, taking my son to a football match. Thinking, well, that's a good texture for the handrails. And it's when you're a designer, that sort of work you're always looking. It's not work, but you just if you see something that catches your eye, will quickly. And then this was sort of there with the handrails; they weren't painted.
Fabulous.
So that's that. And then we just start to get a little bit more finished. That's obviously a finished set with people on it. That was for the big. I think it was that the big celebration scene. I think.
Yeah. Freedom Day.
But you can see how close we were to the top. The DP.
Amazing.
Really, a lot of discussion there. But managed
and just to add to that, we had to take the ceiling of the stage out for the lighting guys to put rigs where you can see it there.
Yeah, so this is a Freedom Day. This is when you really start to see the big scale. I remember we walked into the stage. Do you remember that, Phil? And saw all these people. We quickly rang Steve, the construction manager, said,
load testing.
Load testing.
Thank you for that. And I can't remember what he said, but he rang the metalwork, you know, our structural engineer, and he said that I can't remember what he said, but it was something about queuing for COVID. There was more chance of something like that happening than this collapsing. But suddenly, when you see that number of people on something that you built or put together, it did make us jump that morning a little bit. So I think that's the end of that one. Then there was a little bit of, we had to, although we never really saw it in the show, we had to have a little think about what the lighting of the silo was. You know, who controls the lighting for daylight, night light, who controls the lights in the apartment. And just how I work, this is a Vectorworks model that I put together. These were other concepts that came along from the concept artists. So we see, again, we were playing around, showing Morton what ideas would work there. This is where the top of the silo, the lighting would be in the dome. So in theory, it was much. Now this is quite interesting. So I would give the model, my Vectorworks model, to Max, the concept artist. He'd take it into SketchUp, and then he would animate the separate elements. So you can see there are lights that sort of open, mirrored, like floodlights coming around. They've got shutters on them. So sometimes you're doing this sort of thing just to explain to people how it works. So, and it's all done pretty basic with basic models, nothing too sophisticated. And because in the end, all you're trying to do is show an idea. You know, it doesn't need to always be a fancy finished visual. And that was really useful for Daniel and the visual effects, because obviously they wanted to see how that works. So they took a lot of direction from us on that. Sometimes we always give as much as we can to visual effects. It's up to them and director whether they use what we give them. They can change every pixel and every frame if they want to, but we always like to give them our thoughts about, and that's how it sort of ended up. Again, it's about reproduction. This is me videoing the screen, so it's not great in that way. And I'll pass it over to Amanda in a minute, because this is the cafeteria, which played quite a big part. We knew there would be cafeterias all the way down the shaft, but it was a sort of very popular meeting place. So these were early concept ideas, and I think this is I never know quite what comes up. I'm not sure much is happening here. Not very exciting, is it? What's going on? Oh, and there's a little video just put through just to give a sort of spatial idea. And we had many ideas like this. It wasn't like this was the one idea and it worked. You go through many incarnations, but the idea was to have a complete ceiling. I did introduce columns because just for construction wise, didn't we feel it was like, wow, that's a big ceiling to cover, but Morton didn't want any columns. So Steve,
I have to say, I think the ceilings are masterful in this show, and it's a design element that's often overlooked, but I think the ceilings are such a strong part of the design.
Yeah, and I think, you know,
It was.
we knew we were going to see an awful lot of stuff in that world. And I think we've got, so that's one of the finished
fabulous.
visuals that we did. And this set was also, there's a good one to start with. There were 3 sets inside this before we got to this stage. It was like a Russian doll. So we had a small set in the middle with using the similar ceiling, but changed the middle. Then we opened it up again to I think the IT department, was it, Phil, Amanda? Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. And it was
then,
the market as well.
and then the market as well, pulled it out, became the market, and then it became the cafeteria. So, and that was just the uses of space, basically.
Yeah.
We didn't have enough room. Oh, and this is who I feel your starring moment, Amanda. So even on this, we would do a full-size set layout. So this was to give Morton an idea of, if you're coming into the cafeteria, you can see the big screen on the far wall over here. I mean, it seems pretty basic, but you know, you really want to understand, if you're building that, you want the director to understand what he's getting, if you know what I mean. So, and then with a lot to do with the floor, nice polished floor. And then this is the rig that was above that Steve put up. And we weren't in a stage, so you didn't have any grid for the stage. You just had to rely on your own support mechanism over the top. So, and I think we were worried about snow loading on the real roof of the place, weren't we, Phil? I think at some point.
That's right. This was a lightweight construction workshop sort of thing. So, but it did work out in the end. We had no snow problems.
And then the screen there was a lot of interest in the screen, with whether it would be a green screen, a blue screen, a back projection.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Yeah,
it was difficult at that point because of COVID. It was difficult to get hold of these screens. They were manufactured in China. Most of them were really busy on festivals and things, so you couldn't just ring up and say, "Can we have a curved screen for this long?" But eventually, because of COVID, all the festivals stopped. So suddenly all the companies that had these screens were open to letting them out again. So we managed. So this is one of the tests that you can see here, that when it first went in, it went in and came. Did it stay in all the time, Phil? I can't remember.
No, because of costs, we took it out and brought it back again for the set.
But because it was such a strong input on lighting, that's why Morton was really keen that it was an interactive piece. This is just a test, obviously. There was no logic to why they suddenly had a video screen in the cafeteria, what the reason for that was, but it needed to be a video screen, not a window. And just going back to, I'll go into, so Amanda, do you want to have a little thing about the cafeteria? Because that was quite a fun world to do, wasn't it?
Yeah, it had to be, there was 2 cafeterias or 3 cafeterias. And so the level of degradation had to be different from the top level down to the mechanical. So we had hundreds of different tops made for the same tables, and all the same chairs, but all aged to a different level. And we chose all the chairs with Morton was very keen, and then we did all the colors, and then the level of aging, and like 5 levels of paint stripped back off the chairs and the tables. And also the lighting was very, very important, because all of it was, the whole set was lit with practical lighting, not film lights.
Oh no, I think that's important to say. The whole of the silo, you basically hold on, get that done. You basically you were lit with practicals, Amanda, weren't you?
Yeah.
Basically, you walk into a set, turn the set lights on, and obviously they put fill lights in to help, but they were keen that basically the set lighting was practical, and that's quite a challenge on, in that world. But once you go in, turn the lights on, you've got you're lit.
Yeah.
So, and I think further down we did justify putting columns in, so it looked like you were further down in that it needed more support structure, because you had the whole of the silo on top of you. Police station, everybody still there? Yeah, police station.
Yeah.
This is one of the main other sets, the police station in the top. This is a mixture of sort of concept art, early ideas of the walkout space, then models, same sort of formula we do, concept ideas, then into models. Again, a solid ceiling over the top of that. And we did actually build other sets within this, didn't we, Phil? We had police cells using the same floor and the same the same ceiling piece, the same lighting.
Yeah.
Very simple models, trying to work out how that all worked. And the technology was interesting. I say it was very, very basic computers, sort of like early 80s style, really. And we went for a square format, more than like that, rather than landscape or portrait, just to give it a different look. And I think didn't those screens have to come from China as well, Amanda?
Yeah, it was a disaster. We had two computers. One was a larger one and one was a smaller one that we could use a bigger iPad in and then cut off the top and bottom so it was square. And we'd ordered these computer screens from China, and there was problems with the boat and this, that, and the other. And when they turned up, they were all smashed to pieces. So that was, you know, you just, you know, can't make us.
I think I don't know whether it is. I think some of our stuff got stuck on the container ship in the Suez Canal, if you remember that.
Oh wow! Yeah, I do remember that.
So this was the exit of the silo going out. Oh, and this is the ramp, and this is Phil and Maria doing a test of the walk. How steep could we make the ramp? Really basic things, but something you just want to explore. So, and then this was early concepts of the ramp, mix of ideas and coming outside. Hold on, go back that one. And even here you can see we're doing physical tests of how high the eye line is, how big is the door. You can see people work in different ways, but you can see Phil and I are really keen to not surprise the director in a bad way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell them as much as they can, even in these simple little printouts on there. We had different letterbox openings. The camera had to go through that, so we had to be. Oh, and then this was the cell at the end of the I can't remember what it was called now. What was that? The holding. The holding cell.
It was the holding cell here. Yeah.
Before they go to the outside world.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And did you have to build all that outside, the outside world part?
Well, this is where.
Say it again. I missed that one.
Cucumber Farm came into play.
Yeah, talking about building the outside world.
Yeah, we'll come to.
Yeah, our one location.
Our one
Right.
location.
That was the Cucumber Farm. We just needed a flat bit of land, really. Most of it was going to be a digital. So this is the walk. This is a little test, but you've seen these are the sort of things that we do, sort of walking up just to get an idea and walking through. Believe it or not, then we walk. That's getting. Believe it or not, that's
through the door. That's great. No, it's so practical.
It is on that. Let's just see what else we've got here, because I think there's I'll just jump on to the next one. Oh, yeah, probably get to the outside here. Here we go. Yeah, so that was the area that we built the exterior on. That's the exit of the ramp down here. And the rest of it was, there we are. That's what we did, a little bit of the ramp, a little bit of the crater and blue screen around that. That was our only location.
Wow.
And I'm very proud of this. This is my stop frame animation of the cleaning of the window. So hold on, this is the best bit.
Brilliant.
So however simple you can try and get an idea over,
of course,
that's there's never enough time and never enough money. I think people have probably seen this, so this is that's following what we're seeing through there. And that's the shot they wanted to do right through into the next bit, and then up. Oh, there we are. See, look, you see my stop motion became real. But that was all done in camera. So we had to shoot this sequence first because they had to have the exterior shot. So that really affected the schedule quite a lot in that basis. So I might feel, Amanda, shall I just go on to a bit of set decoration?
Yeah.
Hold on. Open with. I think this will come up all right. There we go.
Oh, yeah, these were early ideas and colours and furniture. Like I said, we ended up designing and building a lot of the furniture because you can't buy it. But I try and find things that from the real world that we could adapt and paint and use from fabrics. I decided in every apartment they had to have a living wall, which, depending on the state of the person in it, whether it was dead or alive.
I mean, that was all about food and everything, wasn't it? That they had to sort of grow their own food.
And so a lot of the sort of the ceramics would look like it's handmade, and those were the heaviest chairs in the world that took 4 men to move the metal.
Wow.
And here's your lighting, Amanda.
Yeah, this is the lighting, the holophone glass, and the so a lot of the lighting was used that, or they were metal lights, with directional, reeded glass using mirrors.
We were sort of quite period non-specific, really. Morton and Graham were very happy to go anything 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. I say it was built 30 years ahead, so all the stuff they managed to cram into the silos wherever they got it from and however they got it in there was a whole mix of furniture. Whether it's industrial, whether it was domestic, whether it was period, and I think that sort of worked. You never really had an idea specifically of what the period was.
But there was never a sort of a fabric shade it all had to be pretty industrial looking and hard wearing. I based all the desks on old fashioned American sort of classic desks. So
we knew the silo was in the States. We knew it was around Atlanta. That was in the story. So we knew a lot of the influences architecturally or design wise inside would come from that world.
And I think one set we had to have 40 desks in, so they all had to be made. All with I decided for some unknown reasons they all had to have fake leather tops to look like that, because leather, they did have cows in the silo, so it was a reusable product. Right. This was Walker's workshop, so again, all based on pictures that I found, made sort of little stands for snippers and things, and I wanted to have it that sort of quite chaotic look where where everything is, but to the outside world it doesn't look like it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say to anybody as a production designer, set decorator, or whatever, we live on reference. We're sort of we're like crows. We just gather all that stuff as much as you can. We are designers, but we're not like graphic designers or furniture designers. We're a bit of everything put together. The reference you get for anything you're doing is any show. It doesn't have to be a reference of that actual period that we're looking at or that style, but so our researchers and AI research I use quite a lot now, so mixed with real research, that's your bread and butter. That's your information. That's where you get it's not where you get all the ideas from in finished ideas, but you get little snippets of ideas. And it might be one little corner of one reference image that suddenly, so like these ones are good, aren't they, Amanda? This world.
Yeah, it came from the script that Gloria was a fertility sort of guru, and then there was a whole scene in a cornfield, and I happened to have some funny old book on Mexican home shrines, and they had the corn in it, and I wanted to bring that into Gloria's apartment because I like the imagery of the home shrines and the things like that. So I did that for Gloria.
And we had we see a cornfield as part of our world as well. So that justified it. So, and going back to the cafeteria, that was some of your early ideas for the
you can see the glass is a very dirty glass, and the like everything, and the chairs are very degraded, and the top of the table has been had a stronger paint on it. These were ideas from kitchens from throughout the ages to make a modular kitchen. So it was the same kitchen in every apartment, with the same sort of gadgets in it.
And we're never shy to use reference from other films.
No.
If somebody's done it well before, well, we don't mind borrowing those ideas.
Yeah,
absolutely.
They're not.
Some fabulous prop makes, and also a question about graphics as well. Somebody's asking about graphics.
Yeah, we could have had Pippa with us, a graphic designer who's with us now, and that was a whole world of creating that atmosphere with that. Just establishing a look for that world. that was our computer that we designed, very simple, basic. It was interesting because we were working for Apple, so we weren't quite sure what we were allowed to do. They didn't really want anything that was an Apple product, obviously, but we did look back eventually and find that a design like this was something that Steve Jobs had done before he even joined Apple. So
yeah, it was called a Nest computer.
So there was a bit of synchronicity there. We didn't know that when we produced
lovely.
the square one. So, and then there were the tokens, the money exchanges, little detailed property things.
Yeah.
But a lot of it had to be bespokely made and designed, like this from something that existed. These are little hand props that were obviously part of the story. But great, Johnny Norman and the prop master and the prop team were brilliant. And again, they're with us now, so that all very personal. I mean, we always know that creating personal spaces like apartments is where Amanda really gets the chance to help the character, because you really see where they live, rather than sort of offices or industrial places. And never, oh, that was quite interesting, Amanda. The tapestry silo.
Yeah, I made some. Yeah, because it's sort of like they didn't really have art as such. It wasn't very sophisticated, but
and no photos. Is that right?
No, they had no camera. Well, there was some very basic camera that's used somewhere for some ID pictures, but on the whole, there was no photographs. So everything had to be of painting or made, and I just based those on old tapestries, putting the silo into it. That was there was a design for a desk. Design,
I mean, lots of nice things, trying to keep in that curved shape as well, down in the hydroponics world. I think it sort of covered most things really, I think, in that. And here the apartment. This was early ideas of our modular apartment. So we would start with a basic sort of lobby, and then we would have different sections that could be put on.
Right.
Obviously, Phil was agreed that obviously it's very easy for me to do this in a digital model. It's a little bit harder to move giant bits of fake concrete around on a stage where you haven't really got any room, but it sort of worked, didn't it?
It was good in the way that it was pods that we could rearrange and get a different format for an apartment, and it worked.
Then there were sort of simple renderings to show, but without any texture on it, just to show how those shapes could work. There was a lot of, as you can see, to keep the circular nature of the silo going. There was a lot of that, and then these are sort of finished ideas. Well, not finished, but ways to the alleyways, based on this original one and these ideas there. Oh, and that was the alleyway set. That was it was like a figure of 8. You could go in all different directions. Normal film work of trying to deceive the audience, thinking sets are much bigger than they really are. So, clever bits of dressing for Amanda and a team to make those. Every time you came back there, it needed to look slightly different. And then I think these are some of the the renderings of the different apartments based on that architectural form. And these are all done by different concept artists that we use, and they all have a different way of working. And bizarrely, they all seem to work in completely different 3D software, which is quite interesting, trying to interchange that with can we send 3D models to different people? Oh, I can't do that one because they haven't got that, but it all sort of work. They all bring their own flavor to it, which is great. So it doesn't look like it's come out of sort of one person's head. I mean, I'm always keen as a designer to, get as many creative people on board as possible. I always equate it a bit like music, when people are producing music in their late teens, or they're completely have no bounds, they'll just do whatever they want. And a lot of young people in the art department have brilliant ideas. They just don't have the experience to know how to use them. So what, Phil and Amanda and I can do, we can use, we're the ones that know how to use that creativity. So, the more people you can, it's very collaborative, as you know. But the more creativity we can get throughout everybody in the art department, you don't want to look as though it's come out of one person's head. Even in our own homes, it's never really just our designs. It's a whole lot of other people.
That's a very good point.
I think, and then these are some of the finished images of different sets of going higher up, early model. That was
Brilliant.
down in the sub area below the silo.
Yes. I was going to ask about the subterranean set and the kind of the logistics of all that water.
Well, we didn't really have much water in the end. There was a lot of visual effects work
Okay, it's very
in there.
convincing.
We just have one tank. We had one small tank, I think, didn't we?
Yeah,
We-
one
we-
small
we
tank.
we had one tank where, yeah, just one person went in. That was it.
Wow. Huh. That's incredible.
Yeah, I think these are all that presentation. Gloria's presentation is you had that
Amazing.
one, because yeah, we've had those. So that sort of covers most of what we
That's
did.
amazing. Yeah.
Oh, turbine.
That's
yeah, the
so
turbine.
lovely to
This is
see.
an interesting one.
Yeah, I think maybe, I don't know whether you want to throw it open to any questions. Just
Yeah, there's a couple of
stop-
questions, but
us
I'm
prattling
sure
on.
everyone would love to see the generator. But there is a couple of questions. I'm going to ask one of them, which was one question was, how many different sets did you build? Someone's asking, was it 17 sets?
No, I saw that. Whoever emailed me that. Sorry for my lack of not replying, but we're a bit busy on the show we're on at the moment. And the one thing I was going to write back and say, it wasn't 17, it was 71.
I thought you said 71 at the beginning. I was thinking 17.
And it was probably, as I say, how many did you have on your list, Phil?
Well, I had 170, but some of those 70 odd sets had like 3 setups within them. So
Right.
it soon accumulated from there.
Yeah, it was between 70 and 100. You have to
Amazing.
pull every set out as a number for finance and budget reasons. So you do end up with that list. But whether an apartment that has 3 rooms is classed as 1 set or that's classed as 4 sets,
Exactly. Yeah.
you never really quite know that. So
No, sure.
We had quite a lot of
Great.
sets. I remember that.
Yes, it looks like. There's another question about white card models. At what point do you decide that you're going to go from a digital model to a white card model?
Pretty immediately,
quickly.
really. We have a great
Yeah.
model maker, Mickey. The digital models are brilliant. They're good for me to just throw ideas around. You're basically sculpting ideas really quickly in 3D, playing around with them. But you then want to start to pick them up and move them around and pull bits of card out. And with a digital model, people can look at a screen and you can have 12 people around a screen, all trying to look at the screen. But if you have a nice model on a table, you can have 12 people around that table, really interactive in a physical way.
I was going to say, between Gavin and myself, we have 3D printers. So rather than just card models, it was like 3D printed models, which is a really fast process. So within a couple of days, we had something for a director to look at and get an answer.
But it's like all the technology things. We all made shows without them. It's like it's just an extra tool that helps you do things. The models become a little bit more detailed because you've got little 3D printed details. But the basic model could have been made without that as well, as it used to be. 20 years ago, you wouldn't have been making them in that way. No, but the physical side of card, it's just for any sort of meeting, even what we're doing now, anything you want to build, let's build it as a card model. So there's no rule about when it becomes a card model, but there's a point where I'd want to be sure that what I'm looking at in a 3D sketchy model also works when you start putting it in a 3D card model. So it hasn't gone away, has it, Phil? It's sort of completely part of it. And also we do, one of our concept guys we on the present show, we'll do 3D, virtual, VR worlds of our sets.
Right.
Send off. We could have done it on Silo. Morton wasn't that interested, particularly. Some directors are, some aren't, but he was with us. He was with us most of the time, so he could see the models, he could see the full size sets. If you're working remotely, as we are at the moment, from a director, then we send the VR model over and he's happy to have a little look around. It's not a final thing, it's just another tool. It's just as well as a physical model, a digital model, and everything requires something different. There's never a rule for one or the other. You just got to look at what you're trying to do and what is the best way of explaining that to people. I went past an architectural office the other day in town. They're still producing physical models of everything they do. That's what people sort of get around. And we are a physical. We all like making models. That's what I'm doing.
Great. And there's another question about scripts. How far in advance did you get the scripts, or
Well,
was some of it kind of quite?
well, we're
think
always
we-
told
I
they're
think-
going to come really soon,
I
quickly.
think
Yes.
at the beginning we got synopsis and it as sort of an idea of what we were doing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And Gavin will say the same thing. We didn't want to read the books before we actually did this project. When the scripts turned up, we didn't want to be disappointed.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've talked to other designers, and other designers will go the other way. They'll always read source material. I've always felt that I don't want to be encumbered by the source material if the
Yeah.
writer's
I
happy
think
with that.
that's right.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like you want to come at it sort of fresh. And as I said, Hugh Howey, the
Absolutely.
writer, didn't have any possessiveness about what we did visually. He said, you know, everybody would look at it in a different way, and he didn't want it to be how he looked at it. He wanted it to be how other people, like our group, looked at it. But I say some designers will go straight to a source material, and I just feel the script is different. I mean, as Hughie said, you know, the written word is very different from the moving picture world in terms of storytelling. You can tell, you know, certain stories in the written word that don't work in the moving picture. So we would rather stay with the scripts. But I don't think there's any right or wrong to that. It's just what you prefer to do. But you never get the scripts as, and it's hard because you've got 10 episodes and you're trying to budget efficiently to know whether you can reuse sets. Do they come up later? Well, if they don't come up, if you haven't got a script, you don't know whether they're going to come up later. It might only happen once in the first episode.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. So crucial to the whole process, isn't it?
no, some shows are really good. Some you'll have scripts really early, and even on a film where there's only one script, look at the first one you get and look at the one you ended up with 10 months later. You probably find there's quite a lot of differences between what you first read. You know, a first draft.
And what has happened to the set? Has it been? Is it still standing? Has it been put in storage?
We didn't do season 2. We're on Citadel 2. So Johnny, our prop master, stayed on and did the second season, and he was, you know, basically they used 80% of the sets are still there. You know, it wouldn't have been quite so much fun for us doing a second because you've got 80%
of course
that exists. So, but we can look at season 2 with a fresh eye, which is nice. You know, hopefully they haven't ruined the sets.
No. No, that's great. And that's kind of answered most of the Q&A questions. A lot of the earlier ones I feel like we covered in the during the chat. So I guess we're kind of over an hour now. So let's wrap it up. And just want to say, personally, I think Silo is an absolute masterclass in production design. I think you guys did absolutely incredible work and are worthy winners of the award. So well done to all of you. And just to say thank you for tuning in, and thank you very much to our panel for spending the time to tell us all about Silo. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.